I was standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning in March when I poured the coffee, and it hit me that something was wrong. Not wrong like the coffee was bad or the pot was broken. Wrong like the air in the room had shifted, like the silence had teeth. I had made this coffee the same way for 4 to 3 years. 2 scoops. The good Folgers. Drip for 6 minutes. I poured it into the blue mug that says World's Best Grandma, and I set it on the counter, and I looked around my kitchen, and I thought, this is the last time. I didn't know why I thought it. I just did. I am 68 years old. My name is Patricia. People call me Pat. I have lived in this house for 31 years, 3 bedrooms, a porch with a broken slat that I never fixed because I liked the way the light came through the gap. A backyard with a dogwood tree that my husband planted the year we moved in. A garage where he kept his tools and I kept my Christmas ornaments, and the smell of both things mixed together every time you open the door. This house is where I raised my kids. This house is where I sat on the kitchen floor when my husband died and ate cereal out of the box because I couldn't stand being in a room with a plate. This house is my life. I poured my coffee. I sat down. I waited. My daughter's name is Karen. She is 4 to 4. She lives 40 minutes away in a subdivision called Willow Creek Estates. Nice houses, big driveways, the kind of place where everyone knows your name but nobody really sees you. Karen moved out 6 years ago after her divorce from a man named Craig. Craig was not a good man, I knew that, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, not the real beginning, the where things were still whole. My husband's name was Dale. Dale and I met at a 4th of July barbecue in 1981 in a town called Cordova, which is east of Memphis. He was standing by the grill flipping burgers, and he looked over at me and said, "You're gonna want the ketchup on the side, aren't you?" And I said, "I always do." And he laughed and said, "I know." And that was it. That was the whole beginning. Nothing romantic, nothing dramatic. Just a man who noticed a small thing about a woman and remembered it. We got married in October. Small wedding. My mother made the cake. His buddy played guitar. I wore a white dress that was really more cream, and it had these little cap sleeves that I loved. Dale wore a suit that was too big in the shoulders because we got it at the last minute. He rolled them up at the wrists the whole day. I never told him that I thought it was the most handsome thing I had ever seen. We had 2 children, Karen first, then a boy named Kevin. Kevin came 3 years later. Karen was always the careful one, the watcher. She would sit on the couch and just stare at you like she was trying to figure out how your brain worked. Kevin was the loud one. He screamed as a baby. He screamed as a toddler. He screamed his way through Little League and high school football and college, and then he just kind of screamed himself into silence after his divorce. But I'm not talking about Kevin right now. I'm talking about Karen. Karen was my whole world for a long time. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it's true. When Dale and I would sit on the porch in the evenings, I would watch Karen through the kitchen window doing homework at the table. The same table where I paid bills. The same table where Dale and I ate dinner every night. I would watch her write her letters, and I would think, this is what life is. This is what you work for. These quiet, ordinary moments that nobody photographs. Karen got married at 23 to Craig Howell. Craig was a salesman. He sold car insurance. He was charming in the way that people are charming when they are hiding something. I did not see it then. I wanted to see the best in people. I always did. Dale used to say, "You have a disease, Pat. You see good in everyone." And I said, "Maybe I do." And he said, "That's what makes you the most beautiful person I know." Karen had 2 kids, a girl named Haley and a boy named Tyler. Haley was born in 1998. Tyler in 2001. Karen quit her job to stay home with them. I was proud of that. I thought it was the right thing. Dale and I helped them financially. We helped them with the down payment on their first house. We bought Haley's car when she turned 16. We paid for Tyler's braces. We drove 3 hours every other weekend to babysit so Karen and Craig could have date nights. We did this for years. This is what parents do. This is what we did. Then, in 2017, Craig cheated on Karen with a woman from his office. Karen found out from a text message. Just a text. Some random woman's name on her husband's phone. Karen called me at 2 in the morning, and I could hear her crying, but she was trying not to. She said, "Mom, I need you to come get me." And I said, "I'm coming." And I drove 40 minutes in my nightgown and my slippers, and I picked her up, and she sat in my passenger seat, and she didn't say a word for the whole drive. When we got home, Dale made her soup. Chicken noodle. The same soup he made for me when I was sick. And Karen ate it, and she cried into the bowl, and we all just sat there in the kitchen letting her. The divorce was ugly. Craig got the house. Karen moved in with us for 8 months. Dale set up the basement for her. He put a TV down there and a couch and a mini fridge. He said it was temporary. It wasn't temporary. It was home for a while. And then Karen got her own place. A 2-bedroom in Cordova. We helped her with the deposit. We helped her with the first month's rent. And then we kept helping. Because that is what you do. For 6 years after the divorce, Karen was the person I talked to every day. Every morning she called. Every evening she called. She would tell me about Haley's school stuff and Tyler's basketball games. She would ask me how Dale was doing. She would say, "I love you, Mom," and I would say, "I love you too, baby," and it felt like everything was fine. It felt like the world was exactly where it should be. Then Dale got sick, pancreatic cancer. They caught it late. Stage 3, he was 6 to 5, I was 6 to 2. We had been married for 3 to 4 years. I thought we had forever. The doctor sat us down in a room with beige walls, and he used the word aggressive, and I remember the way the word sounded in that room. Like a door closing, like a lock turning. Dale fought it for 11 months. 11 months of chemotherapy that made him so sick he couldn't stand up. 11 months of me sitting by his bed at the hospital, holding his hand while he slept and tried to dream something better. 11 months of me learning how to change a bandage and manage a feeding tube and cook meals he could actually swallow. Karen came every weekend. She would drive the 40 minutes and sit with us, and she would cry, and I would tell her not to because Dale needed to see us strong. And she would stop crying, and she would hold his hand, and she would say, "Dad, you're gonna beat this." And Dale would open his eyes, and he would look at her, and he would say, "I'm trying, sweetheart." He died on a Thursday in April. The rain was coming down so hard the gutters were overflowing. I remember that. I remember the sound of the water against the windows. I remember the nurse saying his heart stopped at 4:17 in the morning. I remember I held his face in my hands, and it was cold, and I couldn't make it warm again. I remember going to the bathroom and throwing up because my body just rejected everything all at once. Karen was there when I came back. She was sitting in the hallway chair, and she looked up at me and she didn't say anything. She just opened her arms, and I fell into her. She was the only person who was there. Kevin called an hour later. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry," but he was in Denver. He was at work. He couldn't come. Karen came. She drove 40 minutes in the rain. She was there. After Dale died, I moved slower. I didn't want to move at all, but the house needed things. The roof was leaking in the back bedroom. The furnace made a sound it shouldn't have made. The yard was getting overgrown because I couldn't bring myself to get out there with the mower. Karen noticed. She always noticed. She would call and say, "Mom, the yard is getting bad." And I would say, "I know." And she would say, "I'm coming over this weekend and we'll take care of it." And she would come. She would bring Haley and Tyler, and we would work in the yard together, and Tyler would try to help, and he would make it worse, and we would all laugh. Those were good days. I held onto those days like rope. Then Karen started talking about selling the house. It started small. She would say things like, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that big house." She would say things like, "Mom, you need to think about your future." She would say things like, "I found this real estate agent who could help you get a good price." And I would say, I'm fine here." And she would say, "I know, Mom, but you have to think about what's best." And I would say, "Dale's things are in the garage. I can't leave his things." And she would say, "We can box them up. We can store them. We can deal with them later." And I would say, "Later is fine. Later is good." But Karen was not just talking. She was planning. I found out about it later. A lot of it later. I found out that she had been talking to a real estate agent named Michelle for months. I found out that Michelle had come to the house twice without me knowing. I found out that Karen had gotten a copy of the deed from the county records office. She had my social security number. She had my power of attorney. She had my signature on a document I never signed. That last I want to say again, She had my signature on a document I never signed. How did she get it? That's the question I keep asking. How did my own daughter get my signature on a document that gave her the right to sell my house? The answer is she forged it. She didn't do it herself. She paid a man in Memphis named Ray to do it. Ray had a fake stamp. He had a machine that could copy a signature so close that a bank wouldn't question it. Karen found Ray through some guy she was dating. Some guy named Derek who was nice to her, and probably only nice to her because he knew what she was doing. I don't know. I don't know any of the details about Derek because I never met him. Karen never introduced him to me. She said he was just a friend who helped her get her mother's house sold. Karen signed the listing agreement in October. She signed it over my name. She listed the house for sale. The asking price was $450,000. My house. The house Dale and I bought in 1993 for $98,000. The house where I raised my children. The house where I sat on the kitchen floor eating cereal the night Dale died. She listed it for $450,000, and the real estate agent Michelle showed it to buyers, and Karen told me she was just looking at the market. She said, "Mom, I'm just checking." I said, "Okay." I said, "Fine." I didn't ask questions because I trusted her, because she was my daughter, because she had held me the night Dale died. A buyer came in November, a couple from Nashville. They offered $400,000. Karen accepted. The sale was supposed to close in December. That's when I found out. I found out because I was at the house doing laundry. I had gone over to get some of Dale's old shirts. I always go over on Saturdays. I drive the 40 minutes and I fold his shirts and I put them in a box and I bring them home and I put them in the closet where I keep them. It's a ritual. It's how I keep him close without keeping him here. On that Saturday in December, I was in the bedroom going through the closet and I heard voices downstairs. I thought Karen was there. She would sometimes stop by to check on the house. I called out and nobody answered. I went downstairs and the front door was unlocked. That was the first thing. The front door was unlocked and I never leave it unlocked. I lock it every time I leave. I walked into the living room and I saw boxes. Boxes everywhere, not neatly packed, just thrown in the corners. The TV was gone. The coffee table was gone. The bookshelf with Dale's old paperbacks was gone. The kitchen table was gone, and on the counter there was a piece of paper. A printout. It said sold. And underneath it said closing date December 15, and the price said $400,000. I stood there holding that paper and I could not breathe. My hands were shaking. The paper was warm from the printer. I looked at the name on the document and it said Patricia Ann Morrow. My name, and underneath it said Karen E. Howell as the authorized agent. And I looked at that and I thought, this is a mistake. This is a clerical error. This is not possible. I called Karen, she didn't answer. I called again, no answer. I called Kevin. He picked up on the third ring. I said, "Kevin, the house is sold." He said, "What?" I said, "Someone sold the house." He said, "Mom, what are you talking about?" I said, "I'm standing in the living room and the boxes are here and there is a paper on the counter that says sold." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I have to go. I have to go," and he hung up. I drove to Karen's house. I drove 40 minutes with the paper on the passenger seat. My hands were still shaking. I pulled into her driveway and I got out and I went to the front door and I knocked and she opened it and she had Haley on her hip and Tyler was in the hallway doing homework. And Karen looked at me and she didn't look surprised. That's the thing, she didn't look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been expecting this visit. She looked calm, she looked tired, but she did not look surprised. I held up the paper. I said, "What is this?" She looked at it. She looked at me. And she said, "Mom, I was going to tell you." She said I was going to tell you before the closing. She said I just didn't know how. And I said, "How? How do you sell my house? How do you take my house and sell it?" She said the house was too big for you. She said you needed something smaller. She said I was thinking about your safety. She said the neighborhood was changing. She said the roof was bad. She said you couldn't afford the repairs. She said a lot of things. She said all of them while looking at the floor. She would not look at me. I said I never signed anything. She said you signed the power of attorney. I said I never signed a power of attorney. She got quiet. Tyler came into the doorway and he saw my face and he said, "Mom, what's wrong?" And Karen said, "Go back to your room." And Tyler went. And I said, "You forged my signature." She didn't answer. I said, "You forged my signature and you sold my house and you did it behind my back and you did it while telling me you loved me." She said, "I do love you, Mom." I said, "Then why? Then why would you do this to me?" She started crying. That's what she did. She started crying and she said, "I needed the money." I said, "What money?" She said, "I have debt, Mom." I said, "What debt?" She said, "My mortgage." She said, "Tyler's school loans." She said, "Haley needs braces." She said, "I'm drowning, Mom. I've been drowning for years." And I said, "You never told me. You never once told me you were drowning. You called me every day and you said, 'I love you,' and you never said you were drowning." She said, "I was ashamed." She said, "I didn't want you to think I was weak." She said, "You and Dad always took care of everything." I said, "Your father is dead." She said, "I know." She said, "I know he's dead." And she looked at me and I saw something in her face that I had never seen before. It was not guilt. It was not love. It was exhaustion. It was the face of a woman who had been carrying something so heavy for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. That did not make it right. Nothing she said made it right. But it made it real. It made it the kind of thing that happens in real life to real people in real kitchens, in real subdivisions, where the grass is green and the fences are white and nobody talks about the things that are actually happening behind the doors. I went home that night and I sat in my car in the driveway of my empty house. The boxes were still there. The living room looked like someone had taken a vacuum to the space where furniture used to be. There were marks on the carpet where the coffee table had been. I pressed my hand against one of the marks, and I thought, this is where Dale used to put his feet up. This is where he would sit and watch the game, and he would yell at the ref, and I would tell him to be quiet, and he would laugh. And now there was just a mark on the carpet and nothing else. I called a lawyer the next day. His name was Bill Harlan. He was a real estate attorney in Cordova. He was 60 years old himself, and he had kind eyes, and he listened to me talk for an hour without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "Patricia, this is going to be a fight." I said, "I know." He said, "Forging a signature and selling a property without the owner's consent is fraud." I said, "I know." He said, "We can challenge the sale." I said, "I know." He said, "It may take a year." I said, "I have time. I have nothing but time." The legal battle took 14 months. 14 months of depositions and documents and lawyers going back and forth. Karen hired her own attorney. Her attorney's name was Greg. Greg was young, and he wore nice suits, and he smiled a lot, and he said things like, "We believe this transaction was conducted in good faith." Bill told me that phrase meant nothing. Bill said, "They are going to try to say you were mentally incompetent." Bill said, "They are going to try to say you didn't understand what you were signing." Bill said, "That is their play." I had to get a psychological evaluation. I had to sit in a room with a doctor and answer questions about my memory and my mood and my ability to make decisions. The doctor was a woman named Dr. Reeves. She was very nice. She asked me if I knew what year it was. I said 2019. She said, "And what month?" I said December. She asked me if I knew where I was. I said my house. She said, "Which house?" I said the one on Maple Drive. She asked me if I could name the current president. I said yes. She asked me if I could count backwards from 100 by sevens. I did it. I did it without stopping. She wrote things down. She looked at me with this expression I couldn't read. When it was over, she said, "Mrs. Morrow, you are one of the most lucid patients I have evaluated this year." I said, "Thank you." She said, "The evaluation will be submitted to the court." I said, "Okay." The forged signature was proven. Ray, the man in Memphis, admitted to forging it. He had a criminal record. He had done it before. Karen's attorney tried to say she didn't know it was forged. Bill presented phone records showing Karen and Ray had exchanged 4 to 7 calls in the 3 months before the sale. 4 to 7 calls. The judge read that number out loud in the courtroom, and I saw Karen's face, and she went white. Not like someone who is embarrassed. White like someone who knows the wall is closing in. The sale was overturned. The house was put back in my name, but by then the buyers had moved in. They had already moved in. They had already taken possession, and they had already started renovating. The closing had happened. The money had been transferred. Karen had gotten her $400,000, or most of it. Greg had taken a chunk. Ray had taken a chunk. And Karen was left with whatever was left after all the lawyers and all the lies were paid for. The buyers were good people. They didn't know. They had done everything through the proper channels. They had a real estate agent. They had an attorney. They had a title search. Everything looked clean. The judge ordered them to vacate, but it took another 3 months. 3 months of people living in my house, eating at my table, sleeping in my bed. I walked through it one time during those 3 months. I went with Bill and the buyer's attorney and I walked through every room. The master bedroom had new curtains. The kitchen had a new backsplash. Someone had painted the hallway a color I would never have chosen. A kind of grayish blue. I stood in the hallway and I touched the wall and I said, "This is my house." And the buyer's attorney said, "Yes, ma'am, it will be restored to its original condition." I said, "I don't care about the condition." I said, "I just want it back." I got the house back in March of 2020, a week before everything shut down. The world stopped, and I was alone in my house with no furniture, and no boxes, and no TV, and a kitchen table that was gone, and a living room that was empty, except for the marks on the carpet. I sat on the floor in the living room the first night, and I ate cereal out of the box. The same thing I did the night Dale died. The same thing I did when the world ended the first time. It took me 4 months to refurnish the house. I bought things slowly. A new coffee table, a new couch, a new TV. I kept the marks on the carpet for a long time. I kept them because they were proof. Proof that something had been there and then it wasn't. Proof that Dale had been there and then he wasn't. Proof that Karen had been there and then she wasn't. Kevin came back. After the legal battle, he called me. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." He said I should have done more. He said I knew something was off, but I didn't want to believe it. I said I know. He said, "Can I come visit?" I said yes. He drove from Denver and he stayed for a week and we sat on the porch and we watched the dogwood tree and we didn't talk about Karen. We didn't talk about the house. We just sat there. Sometimes that is enough. Karen and I don't talk. We tried once. She called me 4 months after the sale was overturned. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't know what she was doing. She said she was scared and ashamed, and she said she would do anything to make it right. I said, "What's done is done." She said, "I know." She said, "I know." And then she cried, and I let her cry, and I said, "I need you to leave now." And she said, "Okay." And she left. And the line went quiet, and I set the phone down, and I didn't pick it up again. Haley is 21 now. She lives in Nashville. She calls me sometimes. Not often. She will call on my birthday. She will call on Christmas. She will say, "I love you, Grandma." And I will say, "I love you too, sweetheart." And we will talk for 20 minutes about nothing. And then we will hang up, and I will sit in the kitchen and look at the blue mug that says "World's Best Grandma." And I will think about the fact that the girl holding that mug now is someone else's daughter. And I will not say that out loud because some things you carry alone. Tyler doesn't call. I don't know why. Maybe he is angry. Maybe he is ashamed. Maybe he doesn't know what to say. I sent him a letter last year, just a card. I said, "I hope you're okay." I said, "I'm here if you need me." I said, "I love you." He never responded. The card is still on my kitchen counter. I haven't moved it. It is now 2024. I am 68 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house on Maple Drive. The porch still has the broken slat. The dogwood tree is taller than it was when Dale planted it. The garage still smells like his tools and my Christmas ornaments. I water the plants every morning. I make coffee the same way, 2 scoops, drip for 6 minutes. I drink it from the blue mug. Some nights I drive to Karen's neighborhood. I don't go to her house. I just drive. I drive down the streets where she lives and I look at the houses and I think about the version of my life where none of this happened, where she never needed the money, where I never found the paper on the counter, where Dale was still alive and we were all sitting on the porch together and the dogwood tree was small and the coffee was hot and nobody was hiding anything. But that life doesn't exist. It never did. It was just something I made up so I could keep going. I sit in my kitchen most mornings now. I sit with my coffee and I look at the door. I listen for the phone. I wait for it to ring. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. The silence sits with me like a person. It sits with me and it doesn't leave. And I have learned that some betrayals don't end. They just become of the room, of the air, of the coffee you drink and the mug you hold and the morning you survive. I still love her. I don't know why, I just do. I love my daughter the way you love a house that caught fire. You love the shape of it. You love what it was before the fire. You stand in the yard and you look at the bones of it and you say this was mine, and I still say it was mine. That is the truest thing I know.